In the vast political and philosophical chessboard of the Dune universe, where power is measured not only in armies but in bloodlines, prophecy and secrets, the Bene Tleilax stand apart as one of the most enigmatic and unsettling factions in the Imperium. While the great powers of the Landsraad paraded their banners in the open, wielding commerce, diplomacy or martial might as their instruments of survival, the Tleilaxu thrived in darkness, in silence, and in laboratories soaked in the stench of sacrilege. What they created, what they bred, was more insidious than force. It was dependence. They were Fleshcrafters, masters of forbidden biotechnologies, resurrectors of the dead, shapers of faces, and merchants of genetic treason. The Imperium ran on spice, certainly, but it was propped up by Tleilaxu inventions. Gaolers, face dancers, axolotl tanks, the tools of resurrection, infiltration and reproduction, all made possible by the masked priests of Bandalong. The irony is almost poetic. The most pious and fanatical sect in the known universe were also its most prolific heretics. And yet, for all their horror, the Tleilaxu were tolerated. More than tolerated, they were relied upon. The Spacing Guild used their biological augmentations to stretch prescience. The Bene Gesserit bartered and maneuvered for access to their genetic secrets. The Carinos kept them close, and the Ixians, their closest technological rivals, feared them deeply. Even the God Emperor Leto II, in his 3,500-year reign, allowed them to persist, not because he trusted them, but because they represented a necessary blasphemy, a controlled aberration in his golden tyranny. It is not difficult to see why the Tleilaxu are viewed with revulsion. Their creations mock the natural order. Their methods, shrouded in mystery and cloaked in religious orthodoxy, violate every taboo of the Imperium. And yet the Bene Tleilax believed, with absolute conviction, that they were on a divine mission. They were not merely experimenting with flesh and memory, they were perfecting it. In their eyes, the rest of the galaxy were blind fools, crawling through genetic mud while they sculpted flesh into divinity. The Tleilaxu worldview is one of secrecy and subversion. They are not builders of empires, they are gardeners of destiny. Where the Atreides sought noble rule and the Harkonnens sought domination, the Tleilaxu sought control of what it means to be human. Their power was not in swords or spice monopolies, but in the whispered knowledge that if they choose to, they could recreate anyone. Resurrect enemies, subvert allies, reshape rulers. The flesh remembers, the flesh obeys, and the Tleilaxu hold the key to the flesh. The Bene Tleilax did not emerge from the great noble houses, nor did they spring from any philosophical academy or ancient religious order known to the wider Imperium. They arose in the quiet decay of the Butlerian aftermath, rising like a virus from the wounds left by humanity's war with its own ambition. To understand them, one must turn to gaps in knowledge, deliberate omissions, and whispers passed between Mentats and Bene Gesserit sisters behind closed doors. The origins of the Tleilaxu are shrouded not merely in mystery, but in deliberate obfuscation, because to know their true genesis is to know a version of history the rest of the Imperium dares not acknowledge. The planet Tleilax, capital of the Bene Tleilax, is first recorded in official chronicles around the year 10,140 AG, although its settlement almost certainly predates that by centuries. The name of the faction itself borrows from the same naming conventions as the Bene Gesserit, the Bene Muslimin, and the Bene Ordrails, placing it within the ancient Zen-Sunni tradition of religious brotherhoods. But unlike its distant cousins, the Tleilaxu order was not formed to preserve human knowledge or extend human potential. It was born out of trauma and a burning desire to reclaim divine authority through flesh. In the centuries following the Butlerian Jihad circa 200 BG to 108 BG, the galaxy was left scorched by the machine tyranny it had overthrown. In rejecting thinking machines, AI, and the cold logic of cybernetic dominion, humanity turned inward, toward religion, toward mysticism, and ultimately toward biological supremacy. The Bene Tleilax emerged from a subset of Zen-Sunni heretics who interpreted the Jihad not just as a war against machines, but as a cosmic mandate that only the perfect human form, shaped by divine will, could inherit the stars. They called their belief system the Great Belief, a fusion of radical Zen-Sunni theology and a deep reverence for biological malleability. To them, DNA was scripture, the flesh was the canvas of God, and manipulation of the human form was not sin, but sacrament. In this view, the universe was not static, nor was the human form sacred as it was. It was raw material, imperfect, to be perfected, to be rewritten. At the center of the Tleilaxu faith is a single, all-consuming truth. God is change, and change is to be engineered. This belief made them natural enemies of the Imperium's orthodoxy. The Orange Catholic Bible, canonized in the year 218 BG, a product of the Commission of Ecumenical Translators, explicitly condemns the manipulation of the soul and the unnatural tampering with the dead. The Tleilaxu disregarded such injunctions. To them, there was no such thing as the soul in the conventional sense. Consciousness was a biological pattern. Memory was a biochemical echo. Rebirth was not the domain of mysticism, it was a laboratory procedure. And this is what truly sets the Bene Tleilax apart. They are deeply religious, but in a way that to others appears monstrous. The Tleilaxu masters, few in number, always male, do not view their science as secular. Their work in genetics, cellular imprinting, and cloning is devotional. Every Gola they breed, every face dancer they engineer, every axolotl tank they install is an act of worship. They are not merely scientists, they are priests of engineered flesh, and their god, whom they refer to in vague but absolute terms, demands perfection through evolution. But the Tleilaxu do not proselytize. Their religion is not for the outside world. It is guarded, secret, and stratified. Only the masters, those genetically selected and rigorously trained from birth, are allowed access to its full tenets. Even their own face dancers, beings grown from engineered cells and designed to be loyal, are kept ignorant of the faith. One of the most disturbing truths of their religion lies in their concept of purity. The Tleilaxu regard themselves as the only true men of the galaxy, biologically untainted, ideologically focused, spiritually elect. All others, be they Ixian technocrats, Carino monarchs, or even the sacred Bene Gesserit, are Gafla, a term borrowed from ancient Islamic traditions meaning heedless ones, the blind masses stumbling in the dark, unaware of the divine mission. This superiority complex allows them to justify any act, no matter how vile, as long as it serves the path toward perfection. Using these methods and more, they built an empire within an empire, hidden in the folds of a single city, Bandalong. Here, behind fortress laboratories and gene vaults, the masters performed their rites. They created Golas, they infiltrated courts with face dancers who could mimic memory and behavior at a cellular level. They sold artificial spice, they trafficked in the sacred, and always, they smiled and bowed to the Imperium while plotting its transformation from the inside. To grasp the scope of the Bene Tleilax's technological power is not simply to explore a list of devices or weapons. It is to step into the crucible where science and belief are indistinguishable, where flesh becomes the cipher for divinity, and the laboratory becomes the altar of a god constructed. In the grand theater of the Imperium, where the Ixians craft mechanical marvels and the Spacing Guild bends time with mutated minds, the Bene Tleilax do something far more dangerous. They manipulate the essence of personhood itself. Their biological technology is their creed made manifest. It is their gospel, recited in chromosomes and sutured in petri dishes. And while the Imperium accepted their products with clenched jaws and averted eyes, few truly understood the scale of the heresy that Tleilaxu were unleashing upon the galaxy. Let us begin with the most famous and most insidious of their creations, the Gola. First introduced to the Imperium in its refined form around 10,170 AG, Golas are not clones in the simplistic sense. They are biological recreations, reborn from the original DNA of a deceased individual, gestated and accelerated in axolotl tanks. In their earliest iterations, Golas were blank slates, replicas devoid of memory, shaped by environment and instruction. But by the time of the events surrounding the House Atreides and the God Emperor's reign, the Tleilaxu had discovered how to restore original memories, effectively resurrecting the dead. This was not a mechanical process, it involved trauma. A carefully orchestrated psychological crisis was required to unlock the suppressed identity within the Gola's mind, and once unlocked, the individual retained not only personality and knowledge, but a continuity of self. In doing so, the Tleilaxu broke a taboo older than the Orange Catholic Bible, the barrier between life and death. But the Golas were never simply about resurrection, they were about control. A resurrected being is a programmable one. The Tleilaxu inserted failsafes, behavioral triggers, and hidden compulsions. A Gola could be made loyal, subservient, or engineered to self-terminate if certain memories resurfaced. And the more valuable the person, be it a mentat, strategist, or warrior, the more potent their recreation became. Their next major invention pushed this philosophy even further: the face dancer. Face dancers first appeared in imperial records during the reign of Shaddam Carino IV, around 10,190 AG, although it's likely they were being deployed in secret decades earlier. At their core, face dancers are biologically engineered shapeshifters, humanoids capable of altering not only their facial features, but skeletal structure, muscle mass, vocal cords, and even scent profiles. This is not illusion, it is transformation, down to the cellular level. Originally designed as tools of espionage, face dancers could perfectly imitate individuals and remain undetected for years. They were used to infiltrate noble houses, manipulate economic networks, and destabilize political alliances. Their ability to memorize behavior, mimic habits, and even absorb surface-level emotional patterns made them indistinguishable from their targets. The key to these abominations lies in the beating heart of the Tleilaxu's technological heresy, the axolotl tank. To the rest of the Imperium, the axolotl tank was a biological mystery, an organic chamber used for cloning, regeneration, and Gola production. Its design was unique to Tleilax, its inner workings hidden even from allies. But by the era of Chapter House Dune, circa 15,220 AG, the horrific truth became known. Axolotl tanks were not devices. They were women, Tleilaxu females, chemically lobotomized, suspended in semi-conscious stasis, and biologically repurposed into gestation machines. This revelation sent shockwaves through the Bene Gesserit, who had long suspected the truth. The Tleilaxu had not simply suppressed their female population, they had transfigured it. By transforming women into production units, they'd eliminated gender from society altogether, achieving a form of patriarchal autocracy so complete it transcended culture and entered biology. Women were no longer participants, they were infrastructure. From these horrific facts came not only Golas and face dancers, but another critical resource: synthetic melange. Though never as potent as the natural spice harvested on Arrakis, the Tleilaxu variant could be grown in secret and tailored for specific effects. It offered the Imperium a forbidden alternative, controlled access to spice without reliance on Arrakis, and in a galaxy addicted to prescience and life extension, such a substance was more than a commodity, it was a weapon. The Tleilaxu also experimented with biological computing, crafting semi-sentient nerve matrices to interface with Ixian devices and mental conditioning protocols for mentats and navigators. In all these fields, their guiding principle remained the same: supremacy through synthesis. Whatever evolution required, they would manufacture it. Whatever taboo existed, they would transgress it. And perhaps most chilling of all was their quiet belief that every creation, no matter how blasphemous, was merely a prototype. Every invention, every manipulation, every horror they inflicted upon the flesh was a step towards something greater, something they believed would render all other human cultures obsolete. The Bene Gesserit manipulated bloodlines for subtle control. The Spacing Guild used spice to navigate time. The Ixians built devices that skirted the edges of forbidden logic. But the Tleilaxu asked a far more terrifying question: why not redefine humanity? And if that meant memory could be overwritten, if identity could be replicated, if the soul could be grown in a vat and programmed like a neural circuit, then the future was no longer in the stars, it was in the flesh. To speak of Tleilaxu society is to step into a hall of mirrors, each surface reflecting a deliberate distortion. Their society is constructed on misdirection, founded on secrecy, and built to resist intrusion at every level. What outsiders see is a facade, an engineered illusion. Behind it lies one of the most tightly stratified, doctrinally unified, and disturbingly functional hierarchies in the entire Imperium. It is a civilization of masks, some biological, some ideological, but all serving one purpose: obedience to the divine will of the Tleilaxu masters. The dominant caste of this society, the Bene Tleilax masters, number in the dozens, perhaps fewer. These are not nobles in the traditional Landsraad sense, nor scientists in the Ixian model. They are a priesthood of flesh shapers and gene lords, answerable to no one outside their order, bound together by religious conviction, selective breeding, and total doctrinal cohesion. Their word is law on Tleilax, their identity is shared, and among them, hierarchy is both rigid and intentionally opaque. Each master is male, a detail not incidental but fundamental. Since the early years of Tleilaxu cultural divergence, Sometime after 10,140 AG, when they withdrew from direct interaction with the Landsraad and consolidated power in Bandalong, females were biologically retained but socially erased. Natural reproduction was abandoned, and the women were repurposed into axolotl tanks. This was the enforcement of a theological mandate. In the eyes of the masters, only men, perfected through breeding and ideological purity, were capable of directing the divine work. Within their society, Tleilaxu boys are bred and raised in isolation from all external contact. From birth, they're indoctrinated with the great belief and taught to revere not individuality, but purpose. Genetic screening determines their placement. Mental acuity, obedience, and ideological devotion determine their advancement. Only the most exceptional rise to the status of master, and even then, they're not self-made men, but products of countless controlled generations of eugenics. Promotion to master is not democratic. The process remains unknown to outsiders, but from scattered intelligence gathered by the Bene Gesserit and guild agents, it's believed that upon promotion, the initiate is subjected to intense genetic imprinting, followed by neural conditioning and memory transference from elder masters. Whether this process is symbolic or literal remains a matter of speculation. What is certain is this: when a new master is created, he speaks as if he's always been one. The individual is subsumed into the collective will. This system has created a phenomenon unique in the Imperium, a ruling class that is, in some sense, functionally singular. While there may be disagreements among the masters, they're never aired externally. They move as one, speak as one, and make decisions as if each voice echoes the last. Their unity, though, is not one of fraternity, it is one of engineered conformity. In a galaxy of fractured houses, broken alliances, and constantly shifting agendas, the Tleilaxu hierarchy is unshakably monolithic. Beneath the masters are the technicians, handlers, and biological servitors. These lower castes are responsible for maintaining the axolotl tanks, growing and programming face dancers, processing spice derivatives, and overseeing the day-to-day functions of Bandalong's biolabs. Technicians are never privy to high doctrine. They are trained to be efficient, faithful, and replaceable. Most are sterile clones, derived from stable genetic lines, optimized for function, not thought. They are allowed no names, no personalities, only designation and duty. Then there are the face dancers, genetically engineered shapeshifters. Face dancers are both the Tleilaxu's greatest tools and greatest internal threat. Originally developed during the mid-10th millennium, perhaps as early as 10,180 AG, face dancers were designed as perfect infiltrators. For centuries, they served with total loyalty, operating as spies, assassins, or disposable agents sent across the Imperium. But by the time of Heretics of Dune, circa 15,210 AG, face dancers began to exhibit troubling traits: autonomy, creativity, even ambition. Some began questioning orders, others started expressing curiosity. This evolution was not anticipated by the masters, and certainly not tolerated. It is believed that exposure to non-Tleilaxu cultures, coupled with repeated memory overlays and adaptive neural architecture, allowed some face dancers to develop individuality. This was heresy of the highest order, abominations questioning their creators. Attempts were made to cull the rogue strains, but by then, it was too late. The virus had already spread. This unanticipated mutation within their own ranks would ultimately spell the beginning of the end for the original Tleilaxu masters. By the time of Chapter House Dune, many of the original masters had been replaced or absorbed by face dancers who had transcended their programming and become something other. These new entities did not merely impersonate their creators, they redefined them. But even before their downfall, the Bene Tleilax had perfected their system of social opacity. To outsiders, it was impossible to determine who was in charge. No names were ever shared, no public figurehead existed. Even the master most commonly known to outsiders, Sightale, was a pseudonym, a mask among masks. Delegations sent from the guild or Bene Gesserit were often met with rotating speakers, none of whom claimed seniority, each repeating the same party line. The illusion of collective governance masked an even more disturbing truth: there may have only ever been one agenda. And this brings us to the heart of their structure, the terrifying genius of the Tleilaxu hierarchy. It is not sustained by law or ideology, but by biology. Every servant is bred for its station. Every master is the product of gene selection and doctrinal programming. Every system, every roll, every deviation is accounted for with culling. In a universe where influence is measured in star systems, spice monopolies, and millennia-old bloodlines, the Bene Tleilax are a bit of an anomaly. They possess no standing army, no renowned house major name, and no great fiefdoms or interstellar shipping lanes. Their home world, Tleilax, is a planet of little renown to the common citizen, close to outsiders, invisible to charts not approved by the guild, and yet from behind the veils of obscurity, they cast a shadow that reaches across the Golden Line throne itself. Let us begin in the early 10,190s AG, when Shaddam Corino IV sits atop the throne of the known universe. The Padishah Emperor rules not only through strength of arms alone, but through a delicate web of relationships between the Spacing Guild, the Landsraad, and the Coam Corporation. Each entity holds a piece of the galaxy's functioning system: military, mobility, economy. All of them, quietly and increasingly, rely on the products of the Bene Tleilax. At first glance, the Tleilaxu are a minor great house. They send no emissaries to formal court. They field no armies in Coam negotiations. Their function to most lords is little more than as exotic biotech vendors. Their delegation, when it appears at all, is composed of interchangeable masked men who refuse to participate in the pageantry of imperial politics, and yet this absence from the visible power structure is the root of their influence. They are not players in the game, they are merchants of the tools the players use to cheat. When Shaddam IV required Gola regeneration technology to revive a Mentat lost in a battle with a Mauritani, he turned to the Tleilaxu. When the Spacing Guild sought to experiment with spice alternatives, it was the Tleilaxu who synthesized melange substitutes. When the Bene Gesserit needed a Duncan Idaho Gola during the reign of the God Emperor Leto II, it was the Tleilaxu who could produce him, again and again, with memory intact. This subtle but absolute control over critical resources placed them in a position few understood until it was too late. The Tleilaxu were not interested in temporary alliances or overt conquest. They were interested in leverage, and no one held it more tightly. Even their economic dealings with Coam were cloaked in ambiguity. Though technically a shareholder in the Combine, the Tleilaxu rarely participated directly. Instead, they sold products through proxies, often laundering their own controversial creations through lesser houses or guild intermediaries. Their laboratories were never inspected. Their trade routes were shielded by guild silence. Their currency was not spice or gold, it was the unquestioned need for their technology. The political brilliance of the Tleilaxu lies in their status as a neutral third party in nearly every major power struggle. During the Atreides-Harkonnen conflict over Arrakis, they offered both sides useful services. They could create spies that looked like family. They could resurrect trusted warriors. They could supply synthetic spice in case Arrakis fell into the wrong hands. In a galaxy full of open declarations and ancient vendettas, the Tleilaxu offered discretion. Yet it is under the reign of Leto Atreides II, the God Emperor, ruling from 10,217 to 13,728 AG, that the Tleilaxu's political relationship with power becomes truly fascinating. The God Emperor did not destroy them, he preserved them, allowing them to continue their work under strict regulation. Why? Because even a tyrant who spanned 3,500 years understood their value. Leto used them to continue his own breeding programs, to produce Golas, and to test the boundaries of obedience and identity. This dynamic reveals a profound truth. The Tleilaxu were tolerated not in spite of their danger, but because of it. Every ruler believed they could outmaneuver them. Every faction believed it was the exception, the one that could use Tleilaxu tools without being compromised. And so, across 10,000 years, the Tleilaxu sidestepped every purge, every war, every inquisition. Nowhere is this more explicit than in the events following the death of the God Emperor, during the time of the Scattering. Between 13,728 AG and 15,000 AG, human civilization splintered, expanding violently into uncharted space. Entire populations disappeared into the void, returning centuries later with new ideologies, new weapons, and new genetic lineages. Among the returnees were evolved face dancers, sentient, autonomous, no longer under Tleilaxu control. The precise moment the old Bene Tleilax order collapsed is difficult to date with certainty. What we do know is that by 15,220 AG, the time of Chapter House Dune, the original Tleilaxu masters were effectively extinct. Not from war or political collapse, but from replacement, a slow, insidious process in which the very tools they'd created, the face dancers, began to supplant them from within. What began as a few anomalous units, face dancers exhibiting self-awareness, improvisation, and long-term independent thinking, rapidly became a clandestine network of sentient shapeshifters operating with complete autonomy. These new face dancers were not loyal to the old doctrine. They were not bound by the Tleilaxu's sacred order, nor did they adhere to the genetic programming that once made them subservient. Somewhere, perhaps during the centuries of the scattering, or possibly earlier in isolated research cells, the face dancers evolved. They ceased to be tools, they became players, and once they did, they purged the masters. This leads us to the unsettling proposition. What is the new Tleilaxu? To answer that, we must look at the behavior of the face dancers post-heretics of Dune. These entities began operating outside their old parameters. They established independent colonies, infiltrated noble houses, seeded false information, and even played multiple sides against each other. They did not seek domination in the traditional sense. They sought substitution, to become the roles they assumed, to replace cultures, leadership, and even species. This was no longer espionage, it was ontological replacement. One could argue that this is the final form of the Tleilaxu project, not a corruption, but an evolution. The face dancers had become fully sentient, biologically adaptive post-humans, capable of independent strategy, long-term infiltration, and perhaps even reproduction. In this light, the replacement of the masters was not a betrayal. It was a logical outcome of a process that the Tleilaxu themselves had set in motion thousands of years earlier. The Tleilaxu as they were are gone, and their guiding philosophy is extinct. What remains is a mockery of their doctrine. Tools without purpose, intelligence without restraint. In a cruel twist of fate, the Tleilaxu created life that was capable of becoming them, and then improving on the deception.